Tomorrow's hot in here.
So what can I do about that?
My,
It's 80-something degrees outside.
my office is freezing. It's hot in here. We need some church fans.
Program.
Okay.
Well, good evening,
Good evening.
and welcome to our program today. We have a very exciting speaker. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Women's History Month and why we're having a program, and then I will introduce the speaker. Dr. Miller will have remarks, and then we'll invite our speaker up. I think I just reversed the program slightly, but we'll continue anyway. The first Women's Rights Convention was held in Seneca Falls, New York in July of 1848. At the time, women did not enjoy the full rights of citizenship and encountered difficulty in obtaining an education, owning property, having a job, or signing a contract after marriage. They did not have a voice and generally were thought of as property of fathers and husbands. Hold on just a second. The convention called together like-minded women and men to discuss the social, civil, and religious condition and the rights of women. The women organized the meeting around 18 sentiments modeled after the Declaration of Independence and introduced 11 resolutions to secure some measure of equality between the sexes. The 9th resolution brought forth the idea and the necessity of a female's right to vote. Elizabeth Cady Stanton, who spoke barely above a whisper when introducing this radical idea, stated, "I saw clearly that the power to make the laws was the right through which all our other rights could be secured." Not all the women supported this bold assertion, and Frederick Douglass had to encourage the passage of it. This struggle for the franchise lasted nearly 70 years before the 19th Amendment was added to the Constitution. Mainstream women fighting for voting rights, unfortunately, often did not take non-white women into consideration, though women of color also fought for suffrage. Thus, Women's History Month is the outgrowth of the struggle for women's suffrage and workers' rights in the United States and women's activism globally. On the heels of the movement for women's liberation in the 1970s, the United Nations started to recognize March 8th as International Women's Day. The National Women's History Project successfully lobbied Congress to implement Women's History Week in 1981 to be celebrated around the time of March 8th. And by 1987, the week had turned into a month. The celebrating of this month is a testament to the women and their struggles and triumphs, often in the face of adversity. And I have to say that yesterday, I heard like all day, Women's International Day, which you never hear. I've never heard it that much ever in my whole time on Earth. And I was shocked and surprised and very happy. Unfortunately, even though we celebrate Women's History Month, this time always reminds me of Zora Neale Hurston's writing, "In Their Eyes Were Watching God." It is still appropriate as we navigate the 21st century, and I'm just reading this as a quote, so I don't mean to offend. As Nanny said, "Honey, the white man is the ruler of everything as far as I've been able to find out. Maybe it's someplace way off in the ocean where the black man is in power, but we don't know nothing but what we see. So the white man throw down the load and tell the nigger man to pick it up. He picks it up because he has to, but he don't tote it. He hand it to his women folks. The nigger woman is the mule of the world so far as I can see." This quote clearly demonstrates the double oppression that black women have traditionally experienced. And so when we do our Women's History Month program, we like to focus on the history of African American women in particular, and women of the diaspora as well. And so today we have a wonderful program documenting the female students at Morgan State University and their activism during the Civil Rights Movement. Now, I'll invite Dr. Miller up for his remarks, and then I'll introduce the speaker since I accidentally pulled the program. Thank you. too much more. So let me turn this off again.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I want to thank Dr. Brown for making sure that every year during Women's History Month, following Black History Month, that we have this celebration. And we're particularly glad to have Ms. Barrett come to Morgan State University, who will soon be, I hope, Dr. Barrett. And, and as she and I were talking prior, I have such deep roots in Morgan, I feel like I'm a bear myself, but I'm a bulldog at heart, as you know. I'm particularly pleased with the subject matter because as an undergraduate student, I got kicked out of school for demonstrations in the 60s. So I was particularly interested in this topic. And of course, when I got kicked out, there were a number of females who got kicked out with us. In fact, I had to write the governor to get my diploma because I was on my way to graduate school. And of course, in those days, students, the governor actually shut Delaware State down completely. And so we were down, and we didn't know what was going to happen to the university. And federal and state troops stayed on that campus for 1 full year after my commencement. So I'm just particularly looking for this topic. You probably don't know that most colleges, black and white, in the 60s went through some very severe demonstrations. It was just a time, students, when Dr. King was still living or just died. In fact, that's why my school shut down. We were trying to name the building after Dr. King and Medgar Evers, and the governor and the board of trustees said no. When I go to Delaware State today, those buildings are named after Dr. King and Medgar Evers. So my getting expelled, I thought, redeemed. They did invite me back 2 years ago to get my diploma at commencement after all these years. So again, these topics are so important. And as students, I want you to understand that as we black people, we've never set them aside. That students were always involved in this fight for freedom. And that's what we're going to hear tonight. Thank you so very much, Dr. Brown.
Still trying to figure out how to turn this camera off. Sorry. Okay. Today, again, we're going to hear from Ms. Simone Barrett. She is a native of Baltimore, Maryland. She is a historian and a museum professional who earned her Bachelor of Arts degree in history and her Master of Arts degree in museum studies and historical preservation. Her primary area of research is 20th century African American history with a focus on Morgan State University's history. Currently, Ms. Barrett is in the concluding phases of her doctoral dissertation titled, Bring Me Our Laurels Whatever They Be, A History of Morgan State University's Student-Led Protest. As the title suggests, her research focuses on Morgan student demonstrations from activities of the Morgan Student NAACP chapter in 1939 to the present day. For her scholarship, the Association of Black Women Historians awarded for her the Drusilla Dungy Houston Memorial Scholarship. Ms. Barrett learned at an early age that race and the economic condition are factors in the type of education that one receives. As a child, her parents often told her stories of growing up in segregated Charm City. Her father, a firefighter, and her mother, an educator, instilled in her the importance of education as a liberating factor as they both faced discrimination in their daily lives because of race. Having such vivid memories influenced her decision to study and to document history. Currently, Ms. Barrett serves on the East Baltimore Historical Library Planning Committee, Morgan State University's Sesquicentennial Committee, and is a member of the Association of African American Museums, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, the Society of American Archivists, the Henrietta Lacks Legacy Group, and she serves as one of Morgan State's unofficial historians. So please join me in welcoming Ms. Simone Barrett as she is our speaker for the evening.
Thank you, Dr. Miller and Dr. Brown, for inviting me here. Just want to give you a little bit of background on Morgan State. Morgan State was founded in 1867. As Dr. Brown mentioned, I'm on the Sesquicentennial Committee where we will be celebrating our 150th anniversary next year. We started off as a Methodist school. In 1939, the state of Maryland brought us from the Methodist Church. But the reason why they brought us was very interesting. There was a gentleman by the name of Donald Gaines Murray. I don't know if you guys know him, that wanted to go to the University of Maryland Law School. And they told him he couldn't because he was black. Thurgood Marshall and Charles Hamilton Houston, along with the Alpha Phi Alpha fraternity, sponsored his court case. And what they argued the case on was that, you know, separate but equal was the law of the land, but the state did not have a separate black institution to send these students to. And because they didn't have a separate black institution, they won kind of by default. Because if it's separate but equal, but you don't have a separate facility, you know, with the state's name on it, they're going to have to go to the University of Maryland, i.e. the state bought Morgan, okay? And when the state bought Morgan, Morgan was already at its current location, which was in northeast Baltimore. They moved there in 1917. At the time, when I say lily white, it was lily white. All white. They had to go to court to even build there because they didn't want them there. And when they went to court, we had a branch in Lynchburg, Virginia that mysteriously burnt down. And students had already come to the campus. But the residents that filed the court case didn't know this. But when Morgan's officials got to court, they said, well, we already have 40 students on campus and there's no problem. And they're like, you have 40 students? Yes, we have 40 students and there's no problem. And that's how we got to be where we were. And it's not only they didn't want the campus, but along with the campus came a new community called Morgan Park. And it was designated, it was in the midst of white people's homes, and it was designated for upper class black people. Clutch the pearls. Oh, those white people were not having that. But Morgan Park was built. It was built with paved roads and street lights, and so when the white people saw it, of course they wanted to move into Morgan Park, but it was designated for a black community. And I'm here to say Morgan Park still exists. Morgan Park, if your house goes on sale in Morgan Park on a Monday, by Friday, someone has purchased that home. That's how hot the properties are in that region. And, you know, the talk that I'm about to give is on Morgan's student-led protest and the role of women in the protest. Now, you know, before we can have any type of protest, there always has to be an outside factor or an outside benefactor. And for us, in Morgan, it was the NAACP. And the NAACP in Baltimore City at the time was run by two women. It was a mother and daughter team. The mother was the president and the daughter was the legal counsel. And their names were Lily Carroll Jackson and Juanita Jackson Mitchell. And these women, like I said, they ran the whole state as far as their civil rights activities. They desegregated parks. They equalized pay for teachers. Because in the state of Maryland, if you were a black teacher and you were a white teacher, you made different money, based nothing upon but your race. They equalized it. They opened up graduate schools, not just the law school, but the School of Dentistry, the School of Social Work, graduate professional schools at the University of Maryland to black people. We got involved, well, Morgan and the NAACP got involved in 1939. We had a chapter on campus. And our chapter on campus did things such as we supported the anti-lynching bill. We supported the don't buy when you can't work. Well, no, I was corrected today. It's buy when you can work campaign. That was the name of the campaign. We supported those things. And also in 1942, if you can believe this, a private in his uniform was killed by a Baltimore City police officer, 1942. Just shot down in Miller Street. Witnesses, of course, nothing happened. And he was like the fourth or fifth that had been shot in a 3-year period. So Morgan students, along with the NAACP, marched on Annapolis to protest that. Okay, 2,000 people went, nothing really came out of it, but at least they marched. In 1947, students on Morgan's campus just marched because we had 900 students taking gym and we had no gymnasium. No gymnasium. Okay, so we got a gymnasium out of that march. We got a couple of dorms. But here's the kicker. The gymnasium was built in 1952. Guess what gymnasium we're still using?
Same one.
The same one that was built in 1952. I just went to other campuses, went to UMBC on Monday. They're 50 years old. I wish you could see their campus as compared to your campus, Morgan's campus, Coppin's campus, any other black school's campus. It's ridiculous, the amount of money that the state has pumped into them. Okay, I'm getting on a tangent. Okay, and in 1948, like I said, we did a lot of things with the NAACP. There was a theater in Baltimore called Ford's Theater, and they relegated black people. They had an open seating, but then they relegated people to the balconies. Once again, NAACP, they went down and they protested every performance. And they had a teacher by the name of Ida Jenkins. She was a member of CORE. She was also a writer for the Afro. She went to every performance and protested as well. Okay, and one of the biggest contentions of Morgan, like I said, they were in an all-white neighborhood. They had a shopping center called Northwood Shopping Center. And the kids could go up and buy things, but they couldn't eat at the Reeds. Does anybody remember Reeds? It's a precursor to Rite Aid. Okay. They couldn't eat at the Reeds. And they protested, and they protested, and they protested, and they protested. And believe it or not, Reeds agreed to desegregate. And not only did they desegregate that one, they desegregated 37 Reeds throughout Baltimore. 37. This is 1955. Students, unheard of. Students did this. But before they desegregated, one particular student by the name of Helena Sorrell, now she's Dr. Helena Hicks. Y'all might have seen her on the news about a year ago. She was supposed to do a talk down at the Reginald Lewis Museum. However, she's still an activist. I'll just say that much. She's still an activist. She didn't want to do it because she wasn't happy with one of the panelists. And she made no bones about it. All 5'2" of her at 80 years old, she stood up and said, no, if he's going to be on it, I don't want to be involved. And when she went there, she said, well, put me on the other end of the stage. When she went there, they escorted her out. They thought she was going to create a scene, so they escorted her out. 80 years old, 5'2". Okay, so you see, we're still being discriminated against. But anyway, in 55, she went into the Rite Aid downtown Baltimore on the corner of Howard and Lexington Street. Impromptu, just her and a bunch of friends trying to get to school. They were cold. Back in the day, women did not wear pants. Women only wore skirts. So it was cold. They were trying to get warm before the bus came. They went in, and of course they were admonished and they were sent away. They were cursed at and they got sent away. They came to school and they told one of their professors. And the professor was upset, not because they protested. The professor was upset because they didn't let an adult know what they were about to do. Because the professor told them, if you had gotten arrested, if something would have happened, no one would have known. No one would have been there to support you. So please keep stay together if you're going to protest, protest as a unit. You know, not one person protesting here and someone else protesting there. But still, her protest was not in vain. Because, like I stated, later on, about 2 months after they did their protest in January, all of the reads were desegregated. And during this protest movement, the students were starting to get noticed by other leaders throughout the female leaders, national leaders, such as Daisy Bates. Are we familiar with Daisy Bates? Students, do we know who Daisy? I see you shaking your head no. Really? You don't know who Daisy Bates is? Daisy Bates is an NAACP leader in Little Rock, Arkansas. She was the leader of the Little Rock 9 movement. That was the first school that challenged the Board versus Brown versus Board decision. And they desegregated the school in Little Rock. She came to Baltimore. She came to Baltimore to speak to the students. She came and she went to one of the places where they were protesting. She spoke to them. She told them how much she admired them, that they were taking a stand to make a difference in the world. And that was just a boost for them, because it's just good to know that you're being acknowledged by national leaders. In 1960, the students, they had been through Northwood, they had desegregated the Reeds, and there was some ice cream parlors. They had desegregated that. They started to go to the Hat Company, which is a precursor of Macy's, and they had a tea room. But they got a court injunction, Macy's got a court injunction, and they stopped the protest. So they went downtown. This is in the spring of 1960s. And most of the time, they would only do their protest during the springs. So they went downtown, and they went to Hochul Combs, that was one of the tea rooms, and they sat, and the waitress came over and said, "May I help you?" Which just took them by surprise, because they really didn't think they were going to be served. So they have a group of 20 students and nobody has money. Right, so somebody had $2 or something, and I guess things were very cheap. So one of the leaders told them, everybody order a slice of pie and a glass of water. So that's what they did. They ordered a slice of pie and a glass of water. And that was maybe March or April. By June, all of the tea rooms downtown had desegregated. So that was Macy's, Hat Company, Hochul, Stewart's. It was like 4 major department stores, and they all desegregated because of the students. By that time, the NAACP and the Urban League are taking notice of the students. Oh my God, these students are, they're going in and they're protesting, but they're having some, good results. Let's latch on. So then it becomes a struggle. You know how some 20-year-olds are, and some of them weren't 20. Some of the leaders had been, in the Korean War, so they were, in their 30s. Some of them were in their 30s. So you have, maybe a 50-year-old trying to tell a 20-year-old or a 30-year-old what to do, and they've just gotten these 2 great victories, or these victories, seemingly without any assistance from, national people or national organizations. So they're like, well, you can't tell us what to do because we're having good success. And it kind of broke down. The systems kind of broke down. The NAACP felt that, they were being disrespectful, that they had been around, they had been doing this protest work before half of these students were born, so how dare you, not, accept our support or be our junior allies, so to speak. And even though they did collaborate, and they did a great voter registration, which eventually won JFK the nomination, well, not the nomination, the presidency, and he won the state of Maryland, and they believed it was based on black people that registered and came out to vote. Okay. However, the biggest protest the students ever had was at Northwood, okay? And if you look at the picture on the front of your program, it's a picture of women in Baltimore City Jail, like herded like cattle. This picture was on the front of the Washington Post and in the New York Times. And when state legislators, white people, black people, saw this picture of these people in jail before trying to go to movies, that's what it was all about. It was a movie theater that was the last holdout. Everything in Northwood had desegregated. And somebody came up with the bright idea, let's do mass arrests. And that's what they did. They kept coming, they kept coming, they kept coming to be arrested. And they thought it was going to be a small arrest, but it turned out over 400 people were arrested. 200 of them were women. Miss Morgan was the first person to go to jail. She was in jail for 8 days after that. I'm quite sure when Miss Morgan first went to jail, she never thought she would be there 8 days. And I've interviewed several women that were in jail during that time. One lady, she was from Pennsylvania. She lived in Quaker country. So when she came to Maryland and saw that we were still, you know, in a segregated state, she was like, what's going on? You know, we've been eating together and, you know, and going to the movies and bowling and everything together for years. She just didn't understand what was going on. So she was very active in the protest. The first graduate of Morgan College, his name was George McMecken. His granddaughter, her name is Peggy Araya. She was involved, and she tells the story of putting on her corduroy suit, her brown corduroy suit, and she told her mother, I'm going to be arrested today. And her mother and father are like, oh, please don't, you'll never find a job or whatever. And she was like, if John Hopkins and Goucher, white women can go to jail, then I can go to jail, because they're going to jail to support me. So if they can do it, I can do it. And she went to jail. I think she said she was there for 3 days. And she said when she got to there, the warden was pulling his hair out. I mean, you know, this isn't a time of mass incarceration in '63. So to have a jail overflowing with 200, you know, now it's a norm, but back then it wasn't a norm. So they didn't know what to do, because the girls had to wear dresses. And she said when she got there, you know, they were out of the dresses. They segregated the students from the regular prisoners, because these are college students. These are women of refinement. These women don't know anything about jail, so they kind of separated them. And she said they always told them, don't give any of the prisoners anything. So she said, of course, we gave them everything. You know, cigarettes, jewelry, whatever we had that we could spare, because they knew at some point they would be going home, and these ladies may not. So they gave them whatever they wanted. But throughout this whole thing, it was a woman that came to the rescue of these ladies. She was the dean of women. Her name was Dr. Thelma Bando. Dr. Bando was one of them old-fashioned women from the 40s who you never saw without her hat, her gloves, her stockings. She took linen tablecloths, linen napkins. She made sure they had their books. She said just because they were in jail, that was no excuse for them not to, number one, study, number two, not to set a proper table for dinner. Said, if we gonna have dinner, we gonna set a proper table. We are ladies, we are Morgan women, and we gonna act like Morgan women regardless of where we are. Now, you gotta remember now, she's a woman of the 30s and the 40s, okay? So of course she had a mentor. Her mentor was Dr. Lucy Diggs Slow. Yes, she was the first women dean at Howard. Also, I'm not AKA, but she was, I'm not Greek at all, but she was a founding member of the Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. And she also belonged to a organization, I'm trying Okay, the National Association of College Women and the National Association of Women's Deans and Advisors of College Schools. Dr. Saloh founded both of these institutions. And Thelma Bando was one of her students. She encouraged Thelma to go, with Dr. Bando, to go to Columbia to study student personnel, because Dr. Bando was very interested in English. And she said, no, your place is with students. And they both were contemporaries of Dr. Willa Player. Willa Player was the president of Bennett College. Bennett women went to jail in '63, also in June. Morgan women went in February. And because they went in June, it was almost the end of the semester, graduation, so of course, the people down in North Carolina was trying to get her to, to call out the protest and take girls out of jail, of course. And she was like, no. She said, I'll make sure they have whatever they need. And furthermore, if we have to hold finals in jail, that's when we'll hold finals in jail. Okay? And President Jenkins at the time, back to Morgan, President Jenkins at the time wanted to suspend the students that were involved in the protest. And she stood up and said, absolutely not. Number one, if you suspend the students, we won't have no students. And because of her, because the way she stood up and said no, Dr. Jenkins in turn called the jail and said, you guys need to do something, because by the weekend, the whole student body will be in jail. Because they wouldn't stop coming. They ran out of transport vehicles, they wouldn't stop coming. And once they had Dr. Jenkins' support, they definitely didn't stop coming in. But because of this picture and public outcry over this picture, everybody was released. Charges were dropped, and the movie desegregated. Now, why is this different from other mass jail-ins or whatever they called them during the time? It's because it was successful. The Albany movement, 500 people went to jail. It was not successful, and they weren't all students. The Atlanta movement, over 200 people went to jail. Still was not. It did not garner the type of results that Morgan students gained. Okay. Now, when we talk about women and their dual desegregation, dual racism or dual discrimination, it's called Jane Crow. And that's something that was a term that was coined by Pauli Murray in the 1941 when she went to Howard, and she just saw how sexist it is. So for women, we not only have to just because of our skin color fight that discrimination, but just based on women, we have to fight it on the gender issue as well. And when we talk about women in the 60s or whatever, there was something called political respectability. It was all about perception. That's why when I said that women had to have linen tablecloths, because it was all about perception. Not perception for us, but perception for white people. Because if we act a certain way, we hope they'll treat us a certain way. It didn't always work, but for women, it was something big. That's why Claudette Colvin could not be the face of, do we know who Claudette Colvin is?
Yes.
Okay. Claudette Colvin could not be the face of the Montgomery bus boycott because she was 15 years old and she was an unwed, pregnant teenager. So respectability was morality. You had to have certain morals. You had to be a church-going member. You had to be married by the time you're 21 or 23, or people looked at you like you had 5 heads because you weren't married. My mother tells the story. She got married to my father at 21 because she had just finished college at age, well, she got married like a month a month before her 21st birthday. She was actually 20. She had finished college, she was working for the FBI, and she didn't want to live at home anymore. But because of political respectability, she could not go and get an apartment. She would have had to stay in her mother's house, her mother and father's house, until she got married. And a lot of women opted to get married at 19, 20, just so they could have some freedom because of this female respectability. Okay? And also the students also went down on the Eastern Shore. Yeah. We were involved with Gloria Richardson, who was no nonsense. I mean, no nonsense. Gloria Richardson's family had been on the Cambridge City Board since the 1930s, which was unheard of in Cambridge. It was unheard of really in Baltimore City, but in Cambridge, on the Eastern Shore, unheard of. And she actually got involved because her daughter got arrested. Her daughter. So once again, we see women. We see women in the mix of things. And it was about, you know, desegregating public accommodations. They put it on a ballot on the Eastern Shore. And she told black people don't come out and vote for it. Her thing was, we don't have to ask for freedom. Freedom is freedom. We don't have to ask these people to please, let's vote for freedom. So of course, the referendum died. They had martial law. So what's it called? The National Guard came in and stayed from 1963, the summer of 1963, until the Civil Rights Act was passed in 1964. So we see here how, you know, the women really, really had a role in the civil rights movement. But even though they had a role, they were still discriminated against by their counterparts. Okay, if I can find it, where Dr. King wrote in Dr. Clark's book, Septina Clark's book, about, you know, you have to come out and protest, but really your role is home, raising your children and supporting your husbands. Julian Bond, somebody wrote Julian Bond when he was chairman of SNCC Women and said, I really would like to join your organization, but I see you don't have any women. And he said, well, yes, well, we had Diane Nash and Ruby Smith and other women. Yeah, but they've all moved on. Diane Nash got married, Ruby Smith moved on, or whatever. And, you know, we would definitely like to have more women. And then closing the letter, he said, if we had more women, such as yourself, working for the organization, this letter wouldn't have as many mistakes in it as it does. Meaning, if you come to work for us, you're not going to be in policy or decision making. You're going to be relegated to secretarial work, answering the phone, typing letters, things of that nature. It just manifested itself. At the March on Washington, they were supposed to have a celebration of women, which they came up with at the last moment. A. Philip Randolph was the host. He couldn't even read the names, so he was stammering over the names of the ladies that were there. It was like it was Daisy Bates, Dorothy Height, Gloria Richardson, and then they had a little celebration or a tea in a side room on a balcony, and they didn't understand why that was offensive. The men didn't understand why women were offended by that. Why do we have to go to a side room? You know, we're in this struggle together. We shouldn't be relegated to a side room. We should be in the front where you are. And so these are some of the drawbacks that women have gone through in battling civil rights. And it continues to today. I mean, you know, we don't make as much as men. You know, it just continues, it perpetuates itself. And these are just some of the things that women went through as far as Morgan State protest is concerned. Now the protest, don't get me wrong, Morgan's protest didn't stop in '63. It continued through the '70s, it continued through the '80s, in the '90s, they shut the campus down. They looked around, you know, there's mold in the dorms, it's mice, it's roaches, you know, things, you know, the dorms were in deplorable condition. They shut campus down in 1990 for a week, took over the administration building. They went to Annapolis, and Schaefer was governor at the time, and he did make some changes. He rented, okay, I talked about the gym and how old it was. They did renovate it for us, but we didn't get a new one. They renovated the gym, they built some new dorms, things of that nature. And I'm not sure if everybody's aware of the court case that's going on now with the state of Maryland and the HBCUs. No, I hear crickets, okay. Okay, the HBCUs in the state of Maryland filed a court case, I guess 2006, against the state, federal court case, which stated that the state of Maryland has not funded the HBCUs the way it did its traditionally white institutions. And in October 2013, the state was found liable for maintaining and perpetuating a separate and unequal system of higher education. And I saw that firsthand for myself. I have a son that's about to go to college, and he's only applied because I'm a state employee. He's applied to state schools. 3 state schools let him in, 1 didn't, just flat out said no. And when I inquired why, they looked at his transcript and told me, oh, he had a 70. Even though it was a high 70, he had a 70 on his transcript in his junior year. We don't accept students like that. Now, this is all the state of Maryland. 1 school gives him 2nd tier honors. 2nd school gives him 2nd tier honors. 3rd school say you can come. The 4th school say you can't even come at all. So that's just how unequal the system of higher education is in the state of Maryland. Make no bones about it. Now, even though we've won this court case, okay, the judge didn't impose a remedy. She said, go back and, you know, try to mediate and work it out. They couldn't work, the 2 sides could not, they had a judge mediating, the 2 sides couldn't work it out. The state offered us what they offered us before they were found liable. Really, people? You're at fault. The federal government says you're at fault, but you still want to give us what you offered us before we even started this process? So what, are we stupid? So now we're waiting on the judge to impose a sentence. But of course, throughout this whole process, Morgan students are still involved. Women are going marching on Annapolis. They were down in Annapolis like 1 day last week. I talked about the 90s. In 2000, we were supposed to get a new library. Okay? Good friend, the mayor's father, the mayor of Baltimore's father, Howard Rawlins, took the money. He was chairman of the Appropriations Committee, took money slated for Morgan's library and sent it to UMBC. So, of course, the president at the time, Dr. Earl S. Richardson, called the alumni house and said, I need 20 buses down on Cold Spring at the lot. I'll have students. And students went down to Annapolis and they confronted Howard Rawlins, and they got the money and we built the library, and it's called the Earl S. Richardson Library. But at the time that was going on, the president of the student council's name was Aisha Byers. It was a woman who talked about how the lighting wasn't good, how the students didn't feel motivated to study in an outdated, non-functioning library. The computers didn't work, the lights were out, the stacks were so close to the lights, you couldn't read the book, you couldn't read the call numbers on the books because the lights were being obscured by the stacks. It was just an awful, awful situation. awful situation. But once again, a woman stood up and she made sure that Morgan students got what they needed. And this is just a testament to Morgan students. Even though we haven't had any, I don't want to say prominent women since Dr. Bando, but we really haven't had a prominent woman that was out there like Dr. Bando since she retired in the 70s. And this is just a little bit about Morgan, its students, and especially their women students in the protest movement. Are there any questions, comments? Because yes.
I have a question. I was just wondering, and this speaks to the period, doesn't necessarily speak to Morgan students in particular, but the Buddy Dean show that was out of Baltimore. Are you familiar with that? Yeah. Okay. Well, this is the show that the movie and the play Hairspray were based from. And so when they were going to protest to integrate the show,
Right.
they decided to take the show off the air versus to integrate it.
Right.
And you were mentioning, these other victories around the same time that people in Baltimore were experiencing, but that wasn't a victory.
Well, I'm not sure.
I'm not saying that. I'm not saying that. They. I'm not saying that they didn't. Not even saying that Morgan students had to do something about that. I'm just saying that this was in the midst of all these, more positive things, but that was a very negative thing. And so I was just asking the relationship, because
That was on television.
I know.
God forbid that, some black guy may have, in the midst of dancing, brushed up against a white woman, and it was caught on camera. Clutch the pearls, we can't have that. So I really think that's the basic reason why, because I believe Buddy Dean, that's a little bit before my time, Buddy Dean was all for it. But I don't think the people at the TV station, the network was ready for that type.
Right. It was their decision. It was the
Right.
network's decision.
And a few years later, more my era, maybe 10 years later, there was something called the Kirby Scott Show. And when Kirby Scott came out, it was integrated. But I think Kirby Scott came out maybe mid to late 60s, early 70s, but it was integrated at the time. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
You said, of course, Morgan students were protesting as far back as 1955 and were getting victories
Yes.
and things of that nature.
Mhm.
Of course, 5 years before the more well-known sit-ins in Greensboro in 1960.
Thank you. Exactly.
Why is there not more attention to Morgan students and what they were achieving in 1955 than what we get believed to be the beginning of the student sit-in movement in Greensboro on February 1st, 1960?
Okay, two reasons. Number one, by 1960, most people had TVs. 55, they didn't have TVs, okay? Number two, we're not deep down south, okay? And it's a third thing. The biggest thing what's the biggest thing that came out of the 1960 sit-ins?
SNCC.
Very good, right, SNCC. SNCC came out of it. SNCC changed the game as we knew it. And don't get me wrong, there was a lot of people doing a lot of protesting before 1960 all over. The first protest I found was down at Fisk University in 1929. They got rid of the white president, and that was the community. In 1944, Howard and the NAACP were going up 7th Street, they sat in a number of places. Mordecai Johnson shut that down, said we getting federal funds. We ain't playing with federal funds. You're not playing with federal funds, y'all need to bring it on in. 1950, it's a 16-year-old student in Moulton, Virginia, Barbara Johns. She lured the principal away from the school, and she called and told him another student had gotten arrested. So he left the school, and she staged a walkout to protest the conditions of her school.
She's my cousin.
Oh, really? Okay. See, so, all right. So I'm just saying, so, right, we got women all over the place. But back to your question, it was SNCC. And what happened with SNCC, a lot of organizations became SNCC affiliates. Morgan's SNCC affiliate was called the Civic Interest Group, right? Oh, I see, you know your history, right? The Civic Interest Group. And the reason why the Civic Interest Group was ever founded, it used to be called the Social Political Action Committee. Okay. But Reverend Sands, Douglas Sands, who was one of the leaders, male leaders, he wrote an open letter asking for support. And when Dr. Jenkins, well, some of the administrators, the legislators in Annapolis got wind of it, and they were challenging Morgan's funding. So, of course, Dr. Jenkins got nervous. So to separate themselves from the school, that's when they founded the Civic Interest Group. It was CNAC on the Eastern Shore. It was NAG over at Howard, right? So, you know, SNCC changed the game. SNCC changed the game. SNCC gave the students a platform, and, you know, on a college campus, I call it an army in waiting. All you need to do is to go to a couple of dorms. Look, we can ready ride over, walk over to Northwood to protest. What y'all doing? Y'all ain't doing nothing. Y'all need to come on and come. And that's how a lot of times it went. So that's what, but it was SNCC. SNCC changed. SNCC. Ella Baker's formation of SNCC changed the game. And why was Ella Baker even involved with SNCC? Because she could not get the respect she needed from the SCLC. That's why she got involved with SNCC. Any other questions? Come on, in the back. Come on. I'm a professor. Come on. I ain't gonna sit in here and don't say nothing. Being cute. Yeah. Come on, ladies, gentlemen. The white one. Yes.
Well, I'm doing a book review on Ella Baker.
Okay.
So the last part where you mentioned about her involvement with SNCC. In fact, I was wanting to ask this: did she happen to have any personal involvement with the Morgan State protests, or did she?
No, because she and Lily Carroll Jackson, they didn't. Yeah. Right. Which book are you using for your report? Barbara Ransby?
I can't remember the author, but it's a recent book.
Okay, it might be Barbara Ransby's book.
It's not.
It's not.
It's the new one that came out about a year or so ago from what is it, Littlefield? Roman in Littlefield. Yeah, pull it out. I can't remember the author's name, but it's the new. It's the new one. It's the new one.
Take some notes from that book or get that book as well. Anybody else? Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
What can students today? I mean, they have a perfect opportunity out there to be active in various movements that are currently going on. And so what can they learn from people during the direct action phase? You gave us some information about the direct action phase of the civil rights movement, but then you also gave us other information about how students continued, protesting even into the 21st century. And then again today, we have another opportunity for students to get involved. So what can they learn from these students before them?
Okay, I don't suggest this, but after the Mike Brown incident, especially when Darren Wilson they said they weren't going to bring him up on charges the day before Thanksgiving in 2014, they shut down the intersection of Cold Spring and Hillen Road. Shut it down day before Thanksgiving. It was, so, that was the kind of civil disobedience they did. They shut it down. The president came out when the news cameras got there. They didn't like that he came out when the news cameras got there. It wasn't there before the news cameras got there. And they voiced their displeasure and kind of sent him scurrying and kind of took over his office as well. like I said, I don't suggest that, but there are always movements. You can join your local, your student governments. You can see if there's a Black Lives Matter movement. You can join and see if your local NAACP has a student chapter. So there's all types of things that they can do. When Freddie Gray, after the unrest last year with Freddie Gray, a lot of students, high school students, because the mayor shut down the buses. So there was a number of students just stuck in the middle of this chaos trying to get home. And Morgan students went to different locations, especially to Mondawmin, which is a major hub of the buses, the subway, and tried to assist students with getting home. They also went down and assisted with the cleanup at Ground Zero, so to speak. They're very, very, very involved in the court case. I mean, extremely involved in the court case. So you need to see what's going on your campuses, what's going on in your neighborhood. Remember, this is your world. This is your world. You're the ones going to be here 40 years from now. I hope I'm around, but, given my age now, I'll be almost 100 in 40 years. So I'm just saying, this is your world. This is the world you're going to bring your children into. You're going to raise your families. You're going to establish your home, your lifestyle. So it's I don't want to say it's up to you, but it's kind of up to you to determine. You see, students in the civil rights movement changed the country. I'm not going to say the civil rights movement wouldn't have been as successful without the student element, but I don't think it would have been as successful without the student element. If you still went through the legal ramifications, that's the difference between the student's interest and the interest before that. Everything was done legally. And I'm seeing the wheels of justice as far as the legal system turns very slowly. However, when you're disrupting people's businesses, when people don't want to come and eat here anymore because you are being racist, then yeah, when you hit people in their pocket, they change, policies, things change. So you have the power. You have the power to change the world you want to live in. You're in school, you're getting an education, so it's kind of up to you guys now. Any other?
I had another question.
Yes,
I'm sorry,
ma'am.
because I had this question while you were presenting, but then I forgot it, and you just reminded me of it. So when they were in jail, who paid their bond to get out?
Okay. It's been a number of stories about who paid the bond. Some people say they lowered, first the bond was like $600. Then they lowered the bond to like $150. Those who could afford it, they bailed out. Others that didn't, they kind of sat. I've heard that a local numbers runner his name was Little Willie Adams, seriously. Little Willie Adams was the local numbers runner, but he also was very, very good friends with Lily Carroll Jackson of the NAACP. I understand he wrote a check. Another account says that everything was dropped once they decided to desegregate. And then I had a pamphlet, a binder of information from one of the student leaders, and in a letter he wrote to one of the newspapers back in the 80s, he said that unknown benefactor. So it's been, right, urban legend. I really, and that's what I state in my dissertation. I have 3 reliable sources that say this one paid, this one says no, the fines were dropped, and then I have this other gentleman who was front and center, the leader of the movement, so to speak, who says an anonymous benefactor paid. So I really do, we really don't know who paid. Yes?
Do you think that, especially since, how, I guess you could say, in the forefront, the Black Lives Matter movement and things like that, how it's more digitized than anything, instead of people going out there and, protesting unless there's, something big happened, a cop killed, somebody young or something like that. Do you think that, it's still as effective now, you know, because there's still a lot of like things that happened, like I think like a couple of years back, and I think South Carolina, these people kicked out these black people from a restaurant because they were like, yeah, they felt threatening, you know, they just didn't eat.
Well, that's still racist, and there's always going to be an element of racism. Probably, and I know we've all experienced it and seen it more since President Obama has been in office. It's just something about, you know, a black man being president that has gotten, you know, the white faction, well, not all white people, but, you know, racist white people up in arms. And the rhetoric that we're hearing from a certain presidential candidate does not help the situation. It's kind of fueling the fire. So you're always going to have your races. And back to South Carolina, you talked about South Carolina, and we saw that the flag came down. And they said that the flag was in 1961 as a ode to the start of the Civil War. Yeah, maybe. But also, it went up because of the Friendship 9. It was a junior college and a co-op worker who were arrested protesting. This was the first jail-in. Small scale, but the first jail-in. And when they went to court, they were fined, you know, $10 or 30 days. Most people would pay the fine. They opted for the 30 days in jail. That was the first jail-in. And then some people from SNCC, from Nashville, there's Diane Nash and some other people came and joined them. But at the height, it was maybe 15 or 20. But they said that was one of the reasons, to calm and squell, let you know, yeah, y'all can protest and what all you want, but still, you know, white supremacy is king in South Carolina. And we're going to prove it by flying this flag over the State House. So, yeah. Any other questions? Yes.
Do you feel like the protests in the mid-20th century differ from how the protests are now?
Yeah. Protests now. Protests now, you guys are more organized. And remember, we talk protests, but they ain't had no cell phone. They ain't had no fax machine. You know, we ain't had social media. You know, everything was word of mouth, or, you know, it was heard on campus. You know, or somebody called somebody. You know how many telegrams? You know, when I'm doing my research, going through these different archives, I see telegrams. You know, you guys don't even know what. Right, exactly. She said what? She don't even know what a telegram is. It was a way, you know, we had to pay for long distance people. Right, you just couldn't pick up the phone and call your relative that lived in Ohio or Virginia. You had to pay extra to talk to them. And you would call at a certain time. So yes, definitely technology has made things a lot easier. It's a lot easier for you to prove police brutality. Right? Couldn't prove police brutality back then. You know, but now, you know, just like we see what happened in Baltimore. You know, that man was so eager to assault that kid, he didn't even realize the kid standing in front of him with his back to him was filming him. So I'm just saying, you know, you have a lot more technology and more things readily available to organize. So your organization is a little bit better. Yeah.
Well, how do you feel about like how we actually utilize the technology to do things?
Oh, I think it's great the way you guys utilize technology. Before the unrest, my son called me and said, "You need to come pick me up because something's gonna go down today." Because everybody was swirling on social media about this thing that was about to happen. So I was able to get him and kind of get him out of harm's way before it all went down, because they were exchanging ideas on social media before it happened. So I think y'all doing a good job with social media. Yes.
I've been giving my marching orders.
Okay, sir. I'm sorry.
Don't leave.
Okay.
Would you please give Ms. Barrett a round of applause? We thank you for coming to Bowie State. You students might not know this, but Bowie State got shut down in the 60s as well. We We had our own protest here, and we had a big conflict with the governor. Some of those students are now college vice presidents and deans, and Boise State has its own separate story which needs to be told. I'm hoping somebody will do the same thing for us that you've done for your school. And of course, it's just been outstanding. I've learned a lot.
Okay, thank you.
In the spring semester, we have African Americans since 1865. I'm just sorry all the classes are not here. We may have to just bring you back and just let you go from class to class so they can hear this presentation. One more time. She said I could hire her to teach. We actually have a position. See?
Okay,
See?
hey.
Speak that the tongue,
Don't
yes?
hate.
Speak it into existence. Just do me one favor. Dr. Lewis, I know you hate to do this, but do bless the food. And let our speaker go first, the students before you do. I know you're not on paid salary, but unfortunately you're a minister, so therefore you're obligated.